All right, good morning, folks. My name is Sam Cole. I'm gonna lead this work group meeting today. Just gonna give folks a couple more minutes to get started here. Probably start around, let's say 10:03.
Hey, Sam, is Mina taking notes today? Or do you want me to try to keep track of some action items as well?
Yeah, that would be great if you could. Apologize for the background noise.
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the California Environmental Flows Workgroup meeting. My name is Samuel Cole. I'm a senior water resource control engineer, and I report to Dan Schultz, who is our fearless leader on this effort and is unfortunately not available to be with us today. So we'll start with first of all, hopefully everyone has a copy of the agenda. It was emailed out on the virus list. If you don't have access to that, let me know and we can get you a copy. But to start off, we'll start with roll call. Probably try to keep it a little bit simpler today, because sometimes it can go a little bit lengthy, and we do actually have the ability to, I believe we have the ability to download the attendance list, so we will try to do that. But I'll go ahead and start with, so we have folks from the State Water Board, Division of Water Rights here. Do we have anyone from DWQ? Regional boards?
Hi, this is oh, go ahead. Sorry. Oh, nope. I know it's hard. Lori Screeb, Regional Board 6 in South Lake Tahoe.
Okay, awesome. And do we have, let's see, we have representation from CDFW, I'm sure. Any other state agencies?
Yeah, this is Jeremy from San Diego Water Board, Region 9. And thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other representation from any other state agencies other than the State Water Board and CDFW?
This is David Stevenson. I'm from the Office of General Counsel at DWR, and I think Norman Johns might be on. Norman, are you on?
Yes, thank you, David.
Awesome, thank you.
Chris Kwan from the Delta Stewardship Council.
Great.
And Nancy Finch with DWR.
Awesome. And do we have any, let's see, any other agencies that are here, nonprofits or federal?
Hi, this is James Lee with the Trinity River Restoration Program and Bureau of Reclamation.
You have Bradley Huggins here with Ballast Point Brewing, San Diego.
And Caitlin Kalua with the California Coastkeeper Alliance.
Hi, this is Jenny Ta from Santa Clara Valley Water District.
Welcome.
Heidi Williams from Santa Clara Valley Water.
Greg Reese with the Bay Institute.
Good morning, Josh Westphal with LA County Sanitation.
Hi, good morning. It's Amber Baylor with the South Orange County Wastewater Authority.
Hi, Conrad Fisher with Water Climate Trust.
Good morning. This is Mia Van Docto with Trout Unlimited.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Is there anyone else that we missed?
It's time for Scorp.
Anthony Falzone from Flow West.
This is Shelley Cartwright with Westlands Water District.
Julie Zimmerman with the Nature Conservancy.
Chris Taniguchi.
Anthony Saraceno. Sorry, Anthony Saraceno, consultant to EDF.
Rich Michelidis, Larry Walker Associates.
Ted Grantham, UC Berkeley.
Tom Hawley, NOAA Fisheries.
Jeanette Howard, the Nature Conservancy.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining. Let's just go ahead and jump right into the first agenda item, so drought updates, round robin on drought updates, and I can lead that off. First of all, the State Water Board, Division of Water Rights, publishes updated information and updates regarding our drought activities to our website at waterboards.ca.gov/drought. And I highly encourage folks to check that out if they're interested in keeping up to date with the activities that are going on. And there's also various LIRIS lists that you can subscribe to receive automated emails regarding any pertinent issues that come up. In particular, I've somewhat been redirected in recent times to focus on drought activity, specifically in the Russian River. So I can talk a little bit to the updates to the Russian River. And then I'm looking at the list. I'm not sure if I have any State Water Board staff on the line that are able to give updates to the Bay Delta effort and the Scott and the Shasta, but I'll start with the Russian River. So we sent out orders to the upper Russian River watershed, curtailing essentially all the appropriative water, appropriative and riparian pre-forest, all water rights basically, and we are preparing to send out orders to the lower Russian River this week. So unfortunately, conditions are not great. So if there's any specific questions, I can definitely provide a little bit more updates to that. Do we have anyone on the line that can provide an update on the Bay Delta? State Water Board staff? Doesn't sound like it. So my understanding is they're basically trying to get the notice of the proposed rulemaking out and hoping to shoot for sending orders in mid-August. It's a pretty big effort, a lot of water rights that are going to potentially be impacted. Drought conditions are really bad this year. And then for the Scott and the Shasta, Dan Worth is on the line. So Scott and the Shasta, there is a board meeting set for August 17th, and the agenda was sent out. Things are moving along. So at this point, I'll open it up for other folks if anyone else has any other updates, drought-related updates. All right, not hearing anything, so let's go ahead and move along to the next agenda item, which is basically I'm going to turn it over to the technical team to introduce the work plan.
Hi, everybody. This is Julie Zimmerman with the Nature Conservancy. I'm part of the technical team, so I'm going to share my screen and start talking about a work plan that we've put together. Let me see here. Okay. Okay. So I think most of you, hopefully most of you on this call have read the framework document or reviewed it when we had the draft out. We've incorporated comments on the draft CEFF technical report, and we now have that ready to go, and we're working on writing some publications from pieces of it. But our technical team is really kind of in a period of transition right now. So we've finished the main CEFF framework, and we're trying to figure out kind of where to go next. And we've put together this work plan as a list of projects that we think really should be done to help enhance the CEFF framework and create more tools that would be really useful for implementation. And we put together this draft. Dan sent it out, so all of you should have received that draft copy, as well as a link to a Google form where you can help comment on it. Before I get in, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what's in it, not too many details. But before I do that, I just wanted to say that none of this is set in stone. It's our initial draft of this. It's not funded. All of it is kind of, we want input from all of you to help us figure out the directions that everyone thinks would be most useful when you take CEFF and then try to implement it in specific places. And so when you go to that Google form, you're going to see questions like, you know, how would you rank these different items in terms of importance, and you know, what would you add that was missing? And that'll be really helpful for us. So the purpose of the work plan is to outline additional work that's really necessary to support the statewide implementation of CEFF, and that includes improvement in technical tools, how we can implement and then track and document case studies to see how it's really working on the ground. And then also providing some mechanisms to share data. So how can we track the case studies and other information that we're getting and have it publicly available and be able to share that. And so, as I mentioned before, this is considered a living document. It's not set in stone. We want to have input from all of you for the revisions, as well as what you think is important. But then we think it should be a document that can be changed over time. So as we move through implementing CEFF, what are the issues that come up and what should really be worked on next? So the work plan is organized into 4 sections, and I have a slide for each of those sections. The first are overarching technical needs that we think need to be addressed. And then we have different needs to further develop the individual sections of the framework. So if you've read the framework, it's organized into sections A, B, and C. So we have specific tasks for each of those sections. And then finally, ongoing maintenance and development of the tools that were put together. So as far as overarching technical needs, one thing that we think is really important are case studies. We had a lot of questions, particularly with review of the draft framework document, about implementation. So how would we see implementing the ecological flow criteria on the ground? And we think that the implementation of flow criteria from CEFF will likely vary with the context, the type of stream, the type of hydrology, the type of management context. And so having case studies across a diversity of stream types and management contexts will really help everyone kind of see how it works in practice. And so we'd like to be able to do additional case studies and then track those results and be able to share information. Another question that came up was, how do we better incorporate groundwater, and how do we look at groundwater surface water interactions? How can we manage surface and groundwater more holistically within the CEFF framework? So having some coordination with SIGMA and FLEDMAR and other programs that consider interactions between surface water and groundwater would be really important, as well as looking at how well groundwater is integrated into the modeling that we did in section A. We also think we need to do more work on where and how to better incorporate non-flow projects and trade-offs between flow and non-flow interventions. The way the framework is organized right now, section A looks at ecological flow criteria based on reference hydrology. In section B, you can then revise those flow criteria based on local concerns or local changes. So if you think that reference hydrology won't achieve your ecological function because there's some change in the watershed, like you have a change in habitat where your reference-based flow will not achieve the same ecological response. And so how do you incorporate that existing information? But it still comes up with flow criteria rather than kind of guiding people through how to look at, adding habitat restoration or something else. So it's in there if we do mention it, but I think having it more explicit would be useful for some people in some situations. Another one is how to integrate climate change forecasts. Should they be integrated as scenarios for management or into our initial modeling, or kind of how best to incorporate that into the framework? Climate change forecasts are not explicitly in there right now. And then the final one on here is adding functionality to the functional flows calculator. So I'm not sure how many of you have used this tool, but in section A, when you're looking at your ecological flow criteria, your reference-based flow criteria, we provide those predictions at the TNC Natural Flows web tool. So you can go to your stream reach and download those. But then you can also upload your own flow data, whether it's unimpaired flow data from a different model or observed flow data from a gauge or something similar, to this other site where you can calculate your own functional flow metrics using the calculator. One thing that we realized is, as an example, if you have a very altered flow regime, the calculator has trouble coming up with or calculating the flow metrics, because it needs seasonality, like a natural pattern of the hydrograph, to be able to pull out the correct functional flow components. So if you have a totally aseasonal hydrograph, or one that's flipped where you have your highest flow of the year in the summer, for example, it's going to have trouble pulling out those flow components because it doesn't match natural hydrology. So those are what we saw as the main overarching technical needs, and those are in the work plan. You can see a little write-up on each of those. The next section are needs specific to Section A. So this is the section where we did the modeling of functional flow metrics based on reference hydrology. And we could use additional models and tools to address groundwater dependent ecosystems. So our reference gauges are in places that don't have they're not dominant groundwater streams. So it's difficult to know how well those models are handling groundwater systems. And then also, how do we deal with intermittent streams? And those are a little bit harder to model. Also, comparisons of statewide functional flow modeling and site-specific or regional models. So we've had a lot of questions about how our modeling might compare to DWR modeling of unimpaired flows, for example. And we've looked at it a little bit, but I think we could do some more analysis to see where, how they differ and the different approaches the modeling took for each of those. And then finally, the natural flows database. So there's the TNC web tool at rivers.codefornature.org, where you can download the functional flow metric predictions as well as monthly natural flows from 1950 to 2015. We did those predictions as a static data set, but we are now working on trying to update that information on a rolling basis. So doing it post 2015, so that if you have flow data from this year, for example, you can compare it to the natural flow predictions for those months to see how your observed data might compare, rather than having to look at long-term averages. For Section B, this is the section where you can bring in site-specific information and develop ecological flow criteria for each flow component that requires that additional consideration. So if you had reason to think that there was a change in your watershed where reference-based flow criteria would no longer achieve your desired ecological outcomes, that's what puts you into Section B, and you use more site-specific data to mostly develop flow ecology relationships. And I think that this is one that's much harder for people, because you actually, in a lot of cases, need to do field work or need to look at existing data. And so we could use some additional tools to help support the development of those flow ecology relationships. Things like interactions between functional flow metrics and temperature, flow alteration and temperature, functional flow metrics and channel morphology. I'm using hydraulic models. Some of this is already being done, but really kind of fleshing it out to fit within the CEFF context. Also, a lot of the work people are doing are stopping at habitat suitability indices. So they model habitat suitability, but doing some additional work to relate habitat suitability more specifically to ecological outcomes would be helpful. And then looking at flow alteration and effects on focal species. So then Section C is the section where the ecological flow criteria, which is an ecological only scenario, are then balanced with other uses for water, and you end up with environmental flow recommendations. So this is that step where you look at trade-offs. The alteration analysis also comes under Section C. So this section is, I think, less specific than our other two. So we do have a framework, but there's fewer tools available. And some of the things that could be useful are development of a monitoring and adaptive management strategy, some more guidance and examples about decision support and decision analysis. We used a decision science structure to help guide these the trade-off analysis, and just some more examples on how to do that would be good. And then modeling of actual flows or actual functional flow metrics to enable alteration analyses at sites with limited gauge data or ungauged sites. So this is a problem that we're seeing in a lot of places where Section A provides what your ecological flow criteria should be in a reference-based condition, but then a lot of places don't have the actual flow data to know what's there, so that you can't look at the difference between the two, you know, how much flow is actually needed at what times of year. And so we, you know, will never have enough gauges in the system to be able to actually observe that or measure that everywhere. So coming up with some type of modeling approach would be really helpful. And then the final category is ongoing maintenance and development. So there are tools that we developed that can't just be left and never looked at again. We have to have some work that maintains those over time. So one of them is ongoing frequently asked questions. We started to put some together after the review of the framework document, but I think those questions are going to change as people start implementing it and we have more information. And so we'll want to continue to add FAQs and answer them so that everyone can access that. Also, maintenance and support of the eFlows website, which is where that functional flows calculator lives. So we've had some trouble just finding the funding and the necessary coding skills to keep that working consistently. So that's something that needs some maintenance. And then also maintenance and support of the Nature Conservancy's Natural Flows web tool. One thing I've learned, you know, being an ecologist, is that once you put these web tools together, you can't just walk away from them. They need constant updating and management. So this is, as long as people find it useful and are using it, we're going to need to put time and effort into keeping them running. And then development and maintenance of the framework, R package, and associated documentation. So this is, you can find a link to that on the Natural Flows web tool site. That's another way you can run the calculator and do the alteration analyses. Case study documentation, web portal, and tracking of outcomes. So we do have a web portal where you can document your case study with a form that you can fill out. So if we can get all of our case studies to be documented in a consistent fashion, then they'd be there for other people to learn from. Develop or maintaining a data management infrastructure. And then one thing that we haven't done yet is developing a strategic communications plan for when this is, how to get this more widely adopted and have people understand how it can be used. So those are the main categories of things. I can answer questions about them. You have that draft document, but really we want your input. This is the Google form link. This link isn't one that you're probably going to want to write down, but it's in that email that Dan sent out. We would like you to go to that form and then score elements of the work plan according to need. Like, what would you find the most useful? List any missing things in there, like things that we didn't come up with that would be really helpful in your work. And then any questions or comments, but also none of this is funded. We're not funded to do any work on this any longer. So we are, if you have thoughts about kind of making this happen, or if you're interested in collaborating with the technical team to implement elements of the work plan, that's where we'd love to have people help us out with this. So I will, I'll end there.
Julie, this is Greg Reese. I have a question about case studies.
Sure.
I was wondering, are you looking for case studies that follow the framework exactly, or if there's restoration efforts, excuse me, that have maybe predate the framework but fairly closely follow it? Are those of interest? I'm just curious.
I think that probably the most useful would be ones that start following the framework and then can document kind of, here's where we had some trouble, or here's where we could have used more information, or, this is how we made it work. I think if they follow that pretty closely but predate it, that would also be helpful, as long as it kind of hits those key elements. I mean, one important thing about CEFF is that all the flow components, all 5 flow components were considered, and you know, a lot of studies only look at maybe the dry season base flow, or they only look at 1 month of flow or something similar. So it's a little bit harder to kind of get it to match what the framework's trying to do. But I think if it can, you know, I think if you can get it to match the framework pretty well, then yeah, that would still be really helpful.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll invite, I mean, if anyone else from the technical team wants to provide comments, they're welcome to answer as well.
Julie, this is Conrad with Water Climate Trust. And I kind of just wanted to reiterate, I guess, for you and also the attorneys, particularly for the state on the call, what we submitted in comments in January, which is, I feel like there's a bit more thinking that needs to go into what has prevented previous in-stream flow studies from the 1970s until very recently from actually resulting in water in-stream. And conversely, in the rare cases where there have been in-stream flow requirements, what has resulted in that happening? And please, whoever is writing this work plan, please review what we submitted in January. I'll try to reiterate it, but pretty please read it, maybe incorporate it. The latest work plan focuses on giving more attention to Section C. I guess my ask has always been, can we not come up with in-stream flow recommendations that are divorced from politics from Section A and B? Dan Schultz has said that we can't. It needs to be tempered with economic impact. That is true if you're talking about public trust flows. That is not true if you're talking about endangered species flows that are linked to the goal of recovery. The ESA has written such that there is no price for allowing a species to go extinct. So can we, instead of or in addition to number 11 in this work plan, with number 11 being focus on how to temper recommendations with economic impact, can we also or instead figure out how to come up with recommendations linked to recovery flows from Section A and B?
Yeah, I mean, so when the technical team approached this, we had really the same concern, right? I mean, if you look at a map of where there are in-stream flow recommendations in the state, it's like a tiny fraction of all the stream miles. So we said, why can't we have some kind of backstop set of flow recommendations that apply everywhere that then get refined or revised as necessary? So that's really Section A. I mean, if you go to the Natural Flows web tool and you click on any stream in the state, you'll get the functional flow metrics that are reference-based. So that is not regulatory, obviously. It's a reference-based set of flow criteria that could, that are likely to be revised in places where the habitat's changed and people have a lot of economic concerns, and the regulatory process is obviously different. But from the perspective of, if you only cared about species and nothing else, and then implementing those would be broadly protective, and they can be a backstop that can apply anywhere. That's different, though, than saying, like, here's your regulatory requirements. So that's a question for the state board. That's not a question for the work group. But as far as our technical team, those Section A flows are, we're trying to flip it where here's flow recommendations that can be looked at statewide, and then they get revised where necessary.
For A and B I'll quit after this, but in order for A and B to actually result in water in the river, it needs to be framed as a recommendation toward the goal of species recovery. Otherwise, the board can't really do anything with it. People on this call, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it needs to be framed as, this is our recommendation for how much water fish need to not go extinct or to recover. Otherwise, it won't matter. Otherwise, the only recommendations that come out of this will be tempered with a fight with water users versus fish people. And just a note, ESA flows also accomplish all kinds of other things. So again, can we come up with recommendations out of A and B that would give the water board what they need to actually give water to the fish? And that needs to be a flow linked to a goal.
Yeah, I mean, we are giving everyone a flow linked to a goal. So so section A flows, the goal is ecological function. And that's kind of one of our changes that we're hoping to make. Instead of saying like, you have to measure this change in this many fish at this life stage, that's too specific and it's very reductionist from an ecological perspective. And so using the functional flow components are broadly protective, and our goal should be ecological function, protecting ecological function. So from the scientific perspective, I think that works. From the regulatory perspective, that's a question for the board and what they can use in their process.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess if I can just add to that, this is Bronwyn Sanford from CDFW. I think one thing that a lot of comments that we received, we're asking questions about that, like how it can feed into the regulatory process. And I think we tried to clarify in the revision that like this is not changing anything about the regulatory process. This is a way to develop flows that can be used, and like depending on the need, it could be a flow that is coming right out of section A and B, or it could be a flow that is like sort of through that negotiation process in section C. It's not changing anything about the structures that already exist. It's just a different way of producing information that can feed into that. So like at CDFW, the flows that we would recommend would be the product of sections A and B. It wouldn't be the section C piece. So I think just to clarify, like it's not changing anything about the structures that exist.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. That's a good comment.
This is Norman at the Department of Water Resources. Julie, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, yes, hi.
Hi, long time no see. Well, that goes for everybody on the call, obviously, but you mentioned a lot of the feedback you've gotten on the draft CEFF document, and it sounds like you guys are really working hard on that. But do you have a timetable at all for when that final version might be out?
Actually, Sam Cole, can you answer that question?
Yes, hi. So let's see. So unfortunately, with the drought, a lot of our staff have been basically redirected to focus and prioritize on drought-related activities, and so it's kind of pushed out the deadline for us to basically try to get that completed. And so, yeah, at this point, I'm not exactly sure what the final deadline will be, but that's kind of the reality of what we're in right now.
Understandable. I have another question, if I could pose that to Julie and whoever else on the tech team wants to chime in. Julie, you mentioned a lot of things in section B on refining and maybe enlarging the scope of the flow ecology relationships. And a lot of them sound really good, but they also sound kind of ambitious. Is that more of a list of items that would be pursued as funding permits, or do you feel like those are essential things to incorporate into the CEFF?
I think the whole work plan is a list of items to be pursued as funding permits. So unfortunately, none of us have any funding to work on this any longer. So that's one reason why we're looking for input to prioritize items, is because we need to find funding for the things that people think are important, and that can help us figure out which are most useful to all of you who should be using this. But none of this is currently funded.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Sam Cole. I also want to mention that we do have a goal of trying to, we anticipate having the final CEFF document out prior to the next quarterly meeting. So that is kind of in the timeline there, just to clarify. So guess at this point, are there any other questions for Julie or the technical team before we move into the next agenda item?
Just one question. I met with my state representative in the Senate to talk about flows, and they were kind of unaware of this process. So I was wondering if there was some way that you guys could educate the legislature a little bit. I know that's not in your comfort zone, but there seems to be a total disconnect, you know, in terms of maybe their priorities, maybe that's what it is. But I don't see what can be a higher priority. And you guys have done such incredible work. I hate to see this languish, and I really would love to figure out a way that we can put together something for the legislature that talks about your work in a, you know, concise manner that, you know, brings it to, at least to their attention and raises the awareness, because I think their awareness is not great. And I think that's a problem, especially since all the agencies are waiting for leadership here. So I don't know if you can speak to that or not.
Right. I mean, that's a really good observation. I think that we have been working on getting the technical report out, the framework document, and all of these tools, and we haven't spent much time on communications, you know, other than through this group and some more scientific, you know, we present to scientific audiences mostly because that's who we're used to presenting to. But I think developing a strategic communications plan would be really helpful. That was on my list of things that we recognized we need, but hasn't been done yet. But if there are key groups that need to hear about it, we're happy to go give presentations or, you know, whatever best form that might be. You know, we have a fact sheet that we've produced, but if someone is good at trying to strategize for that and wants to help, I think it'd be great to figure out, you know, who are the people that we should be talking to and what's kind of the best way to do it.
Great. Well, great. Thanks for your willingness to do that, because my brain's already firing.
And I'll just add, Kimberly, this is Eric Stein, also from the tech team, that I think that in our work, we don't tend to directly work with the legislature or their legislatures or their staff. We tend to work more with the agencies, but I think any help that others can provide, whether it be from agency leadership or from groups such as yourselves, any help that you have with your connections to your representatives that can sort of open doors for those types of briefing for the legislature or their staff, I think those are always helpful, right? Because those are typically not the types of relationships we have very well established.
No, it's great to know. Definitely on my to-do list now.
This is Conrad, just briefly on that note. I recently compiled a list of laws the legislature has passed where they're essentially asking for in-stream flow recommendations. So if anybody wants to take this on, I'm happy to try to compile a legislative history, because they've certainly asked for what you all are now doing many times.
Okay, so we're at the peak now. We just got to get it over the goal line of the mixed metaphors.
Right. Okay. So with that, we can jump into agenda item 4. We are a little bit ahead of schedule here, but that's okay. Basically just round robin updates, non-drought related. So if anyone has any updates they think will be pertinent to this group, now is the opportunity. All right, not hearing any takers. So with that, we can move into agenda item 5, potential topics for the next work group meeting on November 9th.
IPCC report. how that might interact with your recommendations.
I'm sorry, which report?
The new IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That came out on Monday, and it kind of gives an update on the global situation. So I thought that would be important to inform our work going forward. Not that that's easy.
Yeah, you will see that one of the topics or one of the items highlighted on our work plan is a more sort of thorough technical exploration of how, you know, these recommendations that come out of the CEFF process would, you know, interface with our understanding of climate change and climate change impacts. So I'd say we've done, you know, some early thinking around this. CEFF in its current format doesn't explicitly address changes in hydrology associated with climate change, but I think there are some pathways forward that will require some additional work, but we could certainly, you know, talk about our current thinking and where we think we need to go. I wouldn't say that we have a definitive answer on that. And I think at our next meeting too, Sam, I think, you know, hopefully we will have an opportunity to maybe summarize if the CEFF has, I mean, if once we've finalized the document and we've gotten approval from the board, that would be a good opportunity to just, I guess, provide another overview of the final technical document and the, you know, the feedback that we received and how we addressed it. Even though we've covered that to some degree in previous meetings, we could provide maybe a brief presentation once it's actually out and released to the public.
And then similarly, as Ted mentioned, we could probably, if folks provide feedback on the form that Julie gave you a link to, we could also discuss what we heard back from the implementation plan, priorities, comments, feedback, and maybe try to identify some either low-hanging fruit or highest priorities that we might pursue some partnerships for moving forward on.
I see Jessica's hand up.
Hi, yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I was just curious, I know there's a document that recently came out, the Collaborative Water Management Guidebook that TNC and the Salmon Restoration Federation came out with, and I was just curious if any of those organizations wanted to give a presentation on that, or how that effort might, you know, link up with the CEFF. I don't know if somebody from TNC is on.
Yeah, so I wasn't one of the main authors of that document, but I did review it, and it predated CEFF, so it doesn't follow the CEFF framework exactly, but all of our organizations that are involved in that guidebook are interested in, you know, collaborating to implement CEFF where we're doing projects. And so I think I'm not sure if there's anyone on the call that can speak to this a little bit more directly, but I think that that's definitely what those groups had in mind. The guidebook is a lot about, you know, how to interact with stakeholders and work with landowners in these kind of small watersheds where you're trying to do projects to get small amounts of flow back in stream. And so the piece where you figure out how much is needed and when, I think, is you use CEFF to do that, and it is mentioned in there as the tool. And then a lot of that guidebook is kind of like how you work with people to get it done. But yeah, I think I can reach out to some of the authors and see if they're interested in talking about it.
Thanks.
Well, they did emergency regulations as a quick update in the Russian River early on this year, which we were very grateful about for. And I see they're going to do the Siskiyou Shasta Shasta Scott soon. So that's all good. You know, trying to get our arms around this stuff is really important. And unfortunately, it's taken, you know, kind of mandatory, you know, efforts, because there's voluntary stuff is not getting us where we need to go. So I'm very grateful that the state is stepping in and trying to tell people they need to sort of plan better, not be planning like we used to in the past. So I wanted to just say thank you to the state for stepping in and doing this, because it's much needed. Thank you.
All right. So do you have any other recommendations on potential topics for the next meeting?
Hi,
Hi,
this is.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, thanks. Hi, this is Jenny Ta. I was just curious about the case studies that have already been underway. I noticed there aren't any documents yet posted, and I'm wondering if that's something that could be a topic for future meetings, just kind of how the case studies have been developing.
Yeah, Jen, I know we've given some updates on specific case studies at past work group meetings, but I think maybe we could provide kind of an overview of the case studies that we're aware of and kind of what the status of them are, because they're in kind of various stages of development.
That'd be great, thanks.
Cole, if you're asking for topics, I mean, I think it'd be fascinating to dive into a little bit in cases where there have been in-stream flow requirements adopted or in-stream flow recommendations put forth, such as CDFWs on the Scott. What led to that? Like the science, the politics, and the law that lead to the things we actually want. Or Mill Deer Antelope Creek. It's happened in very, very few places where there's an official recommendation from the fish agencies to the water board, and even fewer places where the water board actually curtails people to give public trust or ESA flows.
All right, thank you. Okay, and with that, can move into the last topic here, which is agenda item 6, basically just wrap up and action items. So the one action item is, you know, again, we're soliciting feedback on the work plan to evaluate those priorities. So go ahead and jump into that link for the survey if you haven't already done so, and update that. Other action items that folks have? Internally here, we're trying to, again, try to finalize the review for the final CEFF document and hopefully have that available in time for our next work plan, or next work group meeting. That's on there as well. Is there any other, Eric, did you have anything else?
No, I think there'll be, depending on what we prioritize for the agenda, there's some good, I wrote down all the suggestions. And so there'll probably be some action items, you know, several of these would require some you know, interim action to prepare, right? So I think the action item would be to identify the future meeting topics and do the necessary preparation, basically. I guess the only other action item I'm looking back through the list is, you know, if there's any follow-up on the discussion about connections with the legislature, if anybody who's a participant in the work group has any follow-up in terms of, you know, mechanisms to make those connections.
This is Norman over at DWR again. I'm brainstorming here and thinking about the complexity of something that was mentioned by Julie as a need for the CEFF moving forward. And I think generally speaking for environmental flows, it's important consideration, and that namely is the surface water groundwater interaction. And I am fairly new to California, so I can't say too much about it, except that I know from the models that we use that it's always a difficult process to model. You know, it's at a different time scale than surface waters, and it probably highly variable throughout the state in terms of, you know, whether they're ephemeral streams that benefit from seasonal groundwater, or whether they're base flows that are maintained, you know, year after year from groundwater. And there's lots of complexities, geography and how to model these things, and then again how to incorporate those into a calculator, kind of like that natural flows calculator. It just seems there's a lot of facets to that, and I don't know where to start, but I was thinking about a way to maybe this group could be a good forum to maybe start that process. I'd like to say that I knew somebody who could come forth and give us the lows and highs in geography of this topic, like how does it vary around the state and what kind of considerations would there be. But I'm not, like I say, I don't have anybody like that in mind. But if somebody on the call thought that they knew someone who could give us sort of the geography of surface water groundwater interaction, I think it'd be a great topic. And this is just brainstorming that can be dangerous on a live call, but it's a topic that comes to mind.
Yeah, this is Greg. I'm going to agree with you that it's really complicated and probably very localized and a lot of different situations. And maybe the best we could hope for is generalities in, you know, gaining reaches, losing reaches, you know, things like that.
So maybe like it's always going to be a section B, local considerations, as opposed to some kind of larger scale thing you would fold into the functional flow calculator at the outset. Yeah, I can see that.
Well, and then even more complicated is where you're like on the San Joaquin River, where formerly gaining reaches because of groundwater overdraft have shifted into losing reaches, and so what do you do there where you've lost that functionality, and whether you try to get it back or what do you do about it?
Well, that would be sort of the current situation, but if you wanted to actually derive a more accurate set of natural flows and therefore a more accurate set of metrics, you would probably want to know what that would have been under the pre-development conditions. Not that that's easy. I'm not saying that it's easy, but if you wanted to make your tools more whole and more accurate, you would have to have it on the natural flows side.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we know is an issue, and we'd love to do work on our kind of the statewide predictions as to, you know, figuring out kind of how we're doing in places that would have had groundwater input or still do, you know, looking at that more explicitly. It's just something that we haven't tackled yet, but if you know, we'd love to have that discussion, and I don't know if this is the meeting to do it or if we want some kind of subgroups that may be interested in this, and we can, you know, maybe talk separately and brainstorm. But I think it's a good, I mean, it's definitely on our work plan, is kind of figuring out that groundwater piece and what more needs to be done.
Well, I'll continue thinking about it and see if some expert comes to mind or something like that. But I do think it's a big topic, and it, you know, it has effects on not just the flow, but those other parts of the flow ecology relationship you mentioned, like the temperature, behavior of the streams, and so on. It's a big one.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that should be addressed more explicitly. Maybe that's the first question that we need to tackle is it something we do kind of at a statewide scale, or is it something that's always going to be section B because it has to be kind of thought of as local conditions. So if you go in a place and you kind of say, well, I know enough about it to know that my predictions from the statewide model might not be giving me all the information because this had groundwater input, but you'd have to know something about the site to know whether that's a concern, and then you might choose to do additional work in that place. It might end up being that, but I think we should spend more time thinking about it.
All right. Okay, folks. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the meeting today. I'd like to thank everyone for the participation and your time. And looks like we're all going to get about 45 minutes back. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for hosting today, Sam.
Yeah.
Thank you.